Let's talk about Vercel and Cloudflare again, because a lot of things have been happening, a lot of developments on the Cloudflare side, and Vercel is not taking a step back. The founder, for example, from both sides, I would say, in a way, Cloudflare also calls out Vercel that you are locking in people in your cloud. Vercel also calls out Cloudflare that, what they want to do is just centralize all the traffic under the pretense of security. So a lot of things going on, and I just want to provide a sort of an unbiased view because I have been customer of both. I mean, we are actually customers of both. So Fermion and Codedam both are hosted on Vercel and are hosted on Cloudflare. I mean, like proxied by Cloudflare, basically. So I have a good amount of understanding of both the platforms inside out. We have used Vercel and Cloudflare both for many, many years. So I just want to give out my unbiased stance on this. Like, where do I stand as a consumer of the product, as well as somebody who's looking at it from a business side also, which would give you a little bit more insights into this whole situation. So I'll need a board for this. So I'll just start explaining a little bit about both of these companies. I don't know a lot of history of, obviously, like we are not going to discuss history and all. But first things first, like a few little things. Cloudflare versus Vercel. Right? So this is the big thing of this video. What is going on over here in terms of the actual functionalities, actual features, and so on. So Cloudflare is a very old company. When it came out, I don't remember the year it came out, but when it actually came out as a company, it was a middleman, right? As far as I remember, like it could be like something different, but the first use case when I started using Cloudflare for very, very small projects, it was a middleman. How it works basically is that you have, let's say, your own EC2 or something, whatever, a server, a raw server or anything. Either you can expose it directly to the internet, for example, for end users. So internet end users, whatever. So you have like a public IP here, 1.2.3.4, anything. So this IP, people directly write your domain name. This IP, your domain name corresponds to this IP and they reach your server. Simple enough. The problem happens is that when you need some level of control or security within your system, for example, if somebody's trying to repeatedly, send request and you want to block that specific IP, which is like a denial of service attack. So that's easy. You can just maintain a list of IP addresses on your EC2 instance and just block them. But still, that is consuming your own resources, right? It's consuming resources of this EC2 instance, which could be better used for serving real customers. Denial of service is usually not a problem for most people because they have like enough resources to just block off an IP address and so on. The problem happens when you have attacks like DDoS, which is distributed denial of service, where everyone from internet, like many IP addresses, simultaneously try to access your service, which corresponds to an attack pattern where it seems like that you are not able to distinguish between normal customers and somebody who's an attacker, right? So these three people, for example, this could be an attacker, this could be an attacker, this could be a normal customer, this could be an attacker, right? So you don't know like who to block. This is what distributed denial of service does. So what Cloudflare like providers does, or in fact Cloudflare only does, is that it says that, okay, let us sit in the middle of your stack. So we'll sit over here, which is like let's say this is in green and this is Cloudflare. And Cloudflare says that, okay, let us absorb this traffic first and then we will send it back to your instance. Given that, let's say if it is an attack, so we'll just try to block it over here only. If it is like a normal traffic, so we can send it back to you. On top of this, Cloudflare also gives you then the ability to, block IP addresses, maybe block bots, just do a bunch of things. Like DNS, of course, you have to route the DNS through them. So DNS management is also handled by Cloudflare. It can do a few more things. For example, let's say because they are the middleman, they can also do things like caching, for example. So if you have like a static asset which is getting served from your EC2 instance, they can just cache it, right, on their own servers, and they can just deliver it directly, hence by reducing load from your server, right? So static caching. Most importantly, what they do is that they shield your real origin, right? So they shield your IP addresses, they shield your infrastructure, all of that, so that only Cloudflare can access it. You can even put a whitelist of IP addresses which just belongs to Cloudflare, and you would basically restrict your server completely from outside world, and this is getting shielded from Cloudflare itself. This is what Cloudflare was in its initial stage. Now, the thing with Vercel is, let's talk about Vercel now a bit. So when Vercel came, right? So when Vercel came, what it did is it did two things. First of all, so it brought a framework with it called as Next.js, right? Next.js was and is revolutionary, because before that there was no real good way to run React.js on server side, right? You can run React and all, but as a client side application. Next.js provided a lot of ease and primitives for, just getting data from server into component and just creating static pages out of the box and so on. So it was like a very nice framework in itself, but you still need it to be deployed somewhere, right? So how would you deploy Next.js framework? Either you deploy it on EC2, for example, this setup, right? Or, you deploy it on a cloud provider like Vercel. Now, the thing happened, what happened with Next.js in general is because this was getting developed by Vercel itself, there were a lot of things which worked, like all the things worked great when you were deploying it on your own inside a container. That's for sure. If you're not able to do that, then it's a skill issue, most likely, because I've done it for myself and it works. You can containerize a Next.js environment and you can deploy it on your own infrastructure. That works fine. The problem happens when you try to deploy it on other cloud providers except for Vercel, right? So, for example, just to give you an example of this, I tried to do this on Netlify and badly failed. I mean, one of the times we were trying to set up a few services of Next.js, of CodeDamp's monorepo on Netlify. It didn't work. It didn't work at all. I had no idea what to debug. Netlify logs were so bad. Maybe the logging was bad. Maybe the Next.js build steps were bad, but I wasn't able to deploy it. So that's one thing, right? Second thing, Cloudflare also offers a product known as Cloudflare Workers. On Workers, the problem is that it's not Node.js. It's not Node.js, but Vercel or Next.js rather, parts of it needs Node.js, right? So it needs Node.js by design. For example, the Lambda functions, which were there earlier, they were deployed on as a Node.js environment, which were the functions that used to revalidate your page and so on. So incremental ISR, incremental static regeneration, some of these concepts used to work on Node.js. So they were by default not supported on Cloudflare Workers. So even if it was supported, AWS, for example, AWS serverless Next.js was a very popular project, which then ended up getting dead. But this was also a project which had a lot of hacks and glue around and here and there things, right? For supporting Next.js on serverless environment. So the problem with Next.js in general always has been that it's very hard to deploy it on a serverless platform, which is not Vercel, which makes sense because the design decisions have been taken in such a way with Next.js. I won't say restrict, but it requires more from the platform on which you are deploying. So what you have to do generally is you have to tweak your platform to deploy Next.js rather than tweaking the source of Next.js and so on. Which is usually why people call that Next.js is a vendor lock-in. It's not exactly a vendor lock-in. You have the source code, it's open source, all of that is there. But the reason people say it's a vendor lock-in is because of these reasons, that it's very hard to deploy a Next.js project on a serverless environment, which is not Vercel. This is why things like OpenNext also exist. So if you see OpenNext.js, Cloudflare recently inherited this project in a way. So you can see this OpenNext is basically effort where you can see OpenNext is an initiative to bring all these efforts together. It's basically backed by SST and Cloudflare, which aims to support all Next.js features and try to deploy it on serverless environments also, like Cloudflare, for example, as well as, if you just want to deploy it on EC2, I think OpenNext would still work, just like Next. But the big thing is that Next.js, unlike Remix, Astro, or other modern frameworks, doesn't have a way of self-host across different platforms. Different serverless platforms that are not containerized, right? So I think this is the distinction where a lot of folks at Vercel also get mad that why are you saying that OpenNext is the real OpenNext and not, Next.js, because Next.js is also open source. So you can run it as a Node.js application, but this doesn't work the same way as it does on Vercel. Of course, if you are containerizing it, by default, it's a single container, which is running somewhere on your EC2 or somewhere, and it's not distributed. It doesn't has edge locations and all of that. So you miss out on the benefits that Vercel gives. So that's the whole fight about, right, with OpenNext and Next.js in general. So what's happening now as a thing is that when Vercel came out with Next.js and all, it was the only good way to deploy Next.js, right? If you go back 2.5 years also, this was the only good way to deploy Next.js in a serverless fashion. Again, just clarifying it every time. What's happening now with the new Cloudflare release, for example, if you go back to Cloudflare blog and if you take a look at this blog post, which I also covered a little bit in the video, the last video, I think. What they have done is Cloudflare is taking big moves. They are taking bold moves on bringing in OpenNext, for example, as one of the projects inside their own inside their own managed effort, and they are maturing their workers product a lot. So workers, initially when Cloudflare workers was brought up, it was just a way of simply running a JavaScript file, which also is not Node.js. It's just a normal JavaScript file, which you can think of it like whatever you will run in a browser, you can probably run it on Cloudflare, and that's it. Now 2 years fast forward, Cloudflare Workers is a very, very strong product, right? Because now it supports like builds, it supports static assets, it supports preview URLs, it supports, gradual deployments and so on, which were like the features of Vercel as a platform. Like it supported CI/CD build, it supported like preview links, which was, I'm not sure if Vercel was one of the first providers, but it definitely made preview links a lot cooler. Like, I mean, personally, I used preview link concept for the very first time when I was using Vercel as a provider. I had worked with PHP in past, but all of those setups were like you buy a hosting from a provider like Hostinger or not Hostinger, HostGator or something, and you go into cPanel, drag drop with FTP and all. So preview links was like a relatively newer concept for me. Preview links and image optimization, all of this, which Vercel I think had a USP. All of this has been built as an infrastructure thing by Cloudflare itself as well, right? Using workers. So the problem here is that earlier, what people used to do, like us, for example, is we will use Vercel to deploy the thing. So Vercel becomes this, and then Cloudflare becomes this as a shielding concept. Now, what Cloudflare is trying to do is that it's trying to sort of remove Vercel from the picture altogether, right? So Vercel just goes away. So if you remove Vercel, what happens is that this component also goes away, this component goes away, and Cloudflare becomes your origin, right? So Cloudflare also has WAF, Web Application Firewall, which is the most interesting part, but it's also becoming an origin. So this origin thing, for example, this is a new thing because Cloudflare saying that, okay, now you don't have to use a provider like Vercel. We can just host your frameworks by ourselves. This is what Cloudflare did with Cloudflare Pages. With Cloudflare Pages, what happened was that it tried to support everything which is there as a framework. For example, I think it supports like Remix, Astro, all of these things. But with the recent update in the last few weeks, Cloudflare has also brought in like a first class sort of, like, I won't say it will still work, but it's an initial effort of supporting Next.js as well as one of the things. And you see when you see the pricing, it becomes ridiculous. Like, how is this even possible? Just look at this Cloudflare Pages pricing, which is, by the way, also the pricing for workers on Cloudflare. 1 build at a time, 500 builds per month, 100 custom domains, okay. Unlimited styles, unlimited static request, and unlimited bandwidth. These two things are ridiculous. If I tell you, compare this with Vercel's pricing model, you would be surprised what happens on Vercel. So if you look at this edge request, for example, 10 million per month is included, and then starting with $2 per million. So this edge request which you see, this includes, if for example, I'll just give you an example. Let's say if I open this page, codedam.com/playgrounds. Let's calculate how many edge requests we have made. We have made with this initial one page load, right? So if I go into this all tab, anything that is starting from codedam.com as a domain, right? So if I sort this, for example, and this thing, for example, all of these domains which are codedam.com, all of these every single request is an edge request for Vercel. So you see over here, I think it's probably more than, I don't know, like it seems like it's like 30-40 requests which are just from the codedam origin. So every single one of these requests is a edge request. If you look at Vercel, for example, let's run some math, for example, real quick. Or let's just use TLDraw only. So if you have something like this, let's say if on single page load of a Next.js app, if you have 50 edge requests on average, let's say, then in order to get to a 1 million request quota, which I think is included, 1 million per month is included, right? So in order to get to 1 million requests, you need 20K page views. Correct? Because 20K into 50 is 1 million. On average, if you have a user that is browsing maybe like 5 pages per user, then you need 4,000 users for your website, which might seem like a huge number of users, but look at a website like Codedam, for example, where you have a blog section. It's a public website. You can sign up for a free account. For example, if I just go ahead and log in my Google account, you can just sign up for a free account and you can just start to, practice, maybe start some playgrounds, create some coding labs, create some problems. So if I'm, for example, if I'm going through this journey, login page, then I signed in, then I went to this coding labs page, then I probably choose this React.js problems or, DSA practice or anything, and I click on this one of these labs. Or maybe I just go back, decide, okay, right now I don't want to do this. I just open this HTML tab. I have probably made like 300-400 requests by this time as a user. And for a website like Codedam, this number is far higher. 5 pages per user is far higher. This is like 15 or 20 maybe. So we need far less users to do that. So this is the number of people which we need to exhaust this quota. Edge request, right? Okay, I got this wrong. Sorry. 10 million per month for paid plan. So still, like if you increase this, for example, with 10, this becomes 2K and actually 20K, because you need 20,000 users, which is fair enough. I would say like 10 million, you need 200K page views, 10 pages per user, you need 20K users, and so on, which is fair enough. But imagine like a Google bot or a crawl bot comes and starts crawling your website, and then you are screwed. So the thing is, if you look at Cloudflare now, unlimited static request and unlimited bandwidth, let's try to calculate this bill a little. So this is at this point we have exhausted our limit. On Codedam, let's say we get 50K users on monthly. So we have like 30K more users. So we have like around, I would say, like let's say 40K, for example, to keep it simple. So we need 10 million more requests, right? So 10 million more requests, edge requests per month, which is where the attack is not happening or something like that is not happening. So if you take a look at over here now, then it starts at $2 per million. So what you have done effectively is you have racked up a bill of $20. Not a lot of money, I would say. It's okay if you are operating at such a scale, you can start to pay this. The problem happens that this is just one of the components. Now, if you go back to the pricing page, you will start seeing that there is another component known as edge middleware, which is something that invokes every time there is an edge request. You can of course shield it away from static assets. But let's say if you have 400K page views, for example, then of course it's not a huge thing. 1 million is already included, but then you start to pay at 65 cents per million. To be very honest, like I have run numbers, and we have also been part of Vercel's new pricing infrastructure, and this starts to rack up easily as your traffic scales up. It starts to rack up, it starts to increase also as well. That is where options like Cloudflare or even self-hosting become very interesting for people like us, for example, who want to save like an additional $150, $200 a month. That corresponds to like easily like 3 to 5K a year. I mean, might not be a lot of money for a big player, but if you are a big player, then these costs are also like 30 or 50K a year, jumping from that. So all of it is like sort of relative. As you grow, your costs also increase. So this is great in terms of a player, but the problem is that Cloudflare exists. The problem for Vercel is that Cloudflare exists, and Cloudflare is not going to let them take away their these numbers just like that. So Cloudflare won't let them make money out of something which they can definitely offer for free or for very cheap. So this is what Cloudflare plays on. And what Vercel then says that, okay, one of the tweets I'm just reading right now is one of the biggest dangers facing the open internet is the increasing centralization of traffic by proxies under the pretense of security. This is definitely like, obviously this is Cloudflare. Security must happen at origin. It can't be outsourced. This preserves the freedom of web and reduces the potential of a global trust and safety team knocking at the door. CDNs are not only performance crunch with incoherent caching and a tax on dynamism, they also create a security and centralization bottleneck. This line and last line in general is something I 100% don't agree with, because I remember this was the same. I had there is a tweet exchange on with me and Roji, who's the founder of Vercel. We discussed that what is the best way to host Next.js, and the best way I said keep everything static and then just on the client side get dynamic paths. And he replied that yes, this is the best way. This is how Vercel was also built initially. With React coming up with React server components and all of that, partial pre-rendering, there are things which are interesting, but that pattern still is not bad. According to me, it's not bad. The trade-offs are not humongous. Like you are not getting massive performance increase. For example, if I give you an example of this, if you go to like Codedam/Playgrounds, what you're seeing over here is a shell that loads first before any JavaScript loads. So if I disable JavaScript, for example, if I disable this and if I refresh this, this is what you will see by default, right? The shell is loaded, these buttons are disabled, the state is disabled, and then once JavaScript kicks in, it starts to get this data from the backend as an API call and so on, and it just loads. The difference that React server components make is that this data itself can be streamed directly from the server. So this is what he says when he says that it's a tax on dynamism and incoherent caching and so on. I don't personally agree with this because I understand these systems inside out, and I feel like there is a benefit, but not at the scale of ditching something like this for a pricing like this. Just being honest, it's not worth to ditch a CDN provider like this. For example, if Cloudflare can sit in front of you and prevent all of this cost which you would incur, it's worth doing it. See, with that being said, I won't say that Vercel is the bad guy here straight out of the box and Cloudflare is a good guy, because Cloudflare also had their equal share of bad things happening, which, to be honest, scares us also, given that, we get a lot of value out of Cloudflare for a very less price. So Cloudflare has been targeted earlier for, its predatory sales tactics, and one of these people who took down their website, Cloudflare took down their websites and asked them to pay like $120,000 within 24 hours in order to restore it. So you can read this blog. I'll just leave the link. There's a full story. There are things that Cloudflare also said that you cannot use this sort of content on our IP addresses, which makes sense. Like they have some policies that if you are a gambling website or something like that, then you buy a dedicated IP from us, Cloudflare. So there is lots of reasoning here and there, but this thing anyway was abrupt, right? Automatically, like something happened and their websites were down. So yeah, I mean, it can happen at the scale, whatever the scale you are operating at. So I don't know, like you have to pick your own providers. But this tweet, for example, I don't really agree with this, even though like I have a lot of respect for Vercel and the work they have done with it. Because at the end, you would also want to be the centralized origin, right? Vercel also operates on 76.76.21.21 IP address and this range. So if you open, for example, if I go to incognito and open Vercel, you will see that if I go and check the doc, refresh this, 76.76.21.164. They have bought a few more IP addresses, but I remember very classic IP address of Vercel, 76.76.21.21. This belongs to Vercel, right? So if I continue this, I think I'll just redirect to Vercel. So sure, somebody can also block Vercel directly and all of the providers would go down with that. So security must happen at origin. It can't be outsourced. This is true. But the problem is that Cloudflare is becoming the origin. That is the bigger problem for Vercel. I agree that if you're putting Cloudflare in front of it, sure, you can get security, but your origin should also be like somewhat ready to handle things, because a lot of times Cloudflare would just pass the traffic directly to you. It might not be able to understand what is a DDoS, what is not a DDoS, and your servers might still go down. So you should have some level of security at origin also. This is wrong. CDNs are not only a performance crunch with incoherent caching and attacks on dynamism, they also create a security and centralization bottleneck. I completely disagree with this statement, to be very honest. Again, have a lot of respect for Vercel and the platform, but this doesn't make a lot of sense. We are running Fermion as a platform completely on Cloudflare and Vercel mix with caching and all enabled by Cloudflare. So this platform, if I show you, for example, let me just show you a real example of how this statement is very wrong. This is one of the examples of a school on Fermion, right? This is rendered by Next.js, hosted on Vercel and served by Cloudflare. So I'm using like everything that is controversial in this. Next.js, Vercel, Cloudflare. This is, by the way, this is really built on Vercel. So if I go to this dashboard, for example, I'm just showing you some of the dashboard paths, and let's say go to school settings. So how Fermion actually works is that you can create all sorts of customization. So if you are a technical creator, for example, you can sell these courses, you can sell the content which you have. One of the example websites we have, for example, one of my friends, Kshitij, he's taking like a Web3 course on this. So if you visit his Web3 course, you will see that this is a white labeled product. It's on Fermion. It's completely hosted by us as a technology, but he just has to teach and he just has to create content. So similarly, you can host your course. This acme.fermion.app is one of the demo schools that we use to give demo to creators when we are on call. So how this works is I have this custom code injection, right? Which automatically gets injected on every page. Now you are talking about, Vercel is saying that CDN is like bad, Cloudflare is bad. But if I, for example, change the script alert hello, let's say, if I change this to this, or not this, because I think somebody might be giving a demo, hello world, for example. If I have this hello world, for example, and if I save this, what's happening right now is that we just pruned all the cache instantly on all the pages, right? So if I refresh this page now, you're gonna see that we get hello world. If I keep refreshing this, if I go to the networks tab, see my cache is disabled, If I refresh this, this is the time it takes to serve this page, right? 51 milliseconds, which is, if you know that, you would know that this is most likely cache. It's not server rendered. We are not running React.js, Node.js, anything like that. At the same time, if you go ahead and search for hello world, you will see the script included in the source itself. If I go ahead and change this to hello world 2, save this, it saves, I refresh this, I go to the console, you would see I still get hello world 2. If I refresh this again, you still see we are under 50 milliseconds as a cache response from the origin server. This origin, by the way, is Vercel, not Cloudflare right now. The caching is handled by Cloudflare. So this infrastructure which we have created includes CDN with no performance crunch and with the dynamism enabled, right? So this statement by definition seems a little biased towards Vercel. I'm saying this out of experience. I know how hard it is to create products like Vercel and all of these deployment platforms, but it's possible to do with Cloudflare. So that's what I also said in the last video, that if I was Vercel, I would really start thinking about what else as a value proposition I can provide. Cloudflare had a great product, Workers, for example, which enabled it to probably fight with platforms like AWS and GCP. I have no idea why platforms like AWS and GCP still don't have a worker-like alternative. And if you're trying to tell me Lambda Edge is as good as Workers, you are probably wrong. It's extremely slow, cold boots, limits I think on the source code are still, I think it's 50 MBs, but the start time is very slow, and all of the problems, typical problems with Lambda, they just increase like 3 to 4x when you're using Lambda Edge as an environment. So Cloudflare had a great product, a universal product which other cloud providers did not have. I think Vercel has to do something similar on those lines in order to beat them. Vercel is great in terms of DX, UX, but the pricing at the end of the day, it comes down to the pricing, because we as companies hosted on these providers also have to take care of the billing and pricing and all of that from our side. So yeah, that's I think that's one of the things which I would say. But yeah, if you're interested in Fermyon, if you're trying to host your courses, if you're trying to sell, bundles, platform access, anything like that, one-on-one calls, if you want to create your own custom pages and so on, you can do that on Fermyon. Go to fermyon.app, schedule a demo with the team. We'll just help you set up your own thing within no time. And by the way, this also supports coding labs and IDE, which I showed you on CodeDam. Everything is available on Fermyon also. So if you're an instructor, if you want to learn more about this product, how you can build your online academy, this is the gem stack it's built on. Not an acronym or anything, but really like the Next.js, Vercel, Cloudflare, the best stack you can find out there for speed and performance. So yeah, that's pretty much it for this video. Hopefully you learned something new about Cloudflare and Vercel both, and about Fermyon as well. I will see you in the next one really soon.